Influenza Epidemic of 1918. The influenza epidemic of 1918 was the most serious epidemic in U.S. history. It infected 20 million Americans, killed 675,000 people within 1 year, and caused panic as the nation had become accustomed to the success of medical science. Almost twice as many U.S. soldiers died from the epidemic than had died in World War I, and more American civilians were killed by the disease than all the U.S. combat deaths during the 20th century combined. The origin of the epidemic are not known, but the first case in the United States occurred on the morning of March 11, 1918, when U.S. Army Private Albert Gitchell checked into the infirmary at Fort Riley, Kansas, with a, quote, bad cold. Doctors diagnosed Gitchell with the flu. Moments later, a second soldier checked into the infirmary with similar symptoms. Within a few hours, more than 100 soldiers had checked into the infirmary with the same symptoms. The number grew to more than 500 cases within a week. That April and May, the San Quentin, California State Prison reported more than 500 cases of an illness with the same symptoms. The disease became known as Spanish influenza, and by July 1918 had killed tens of thousands of people worldwide. The early stages of the disease did not overly concern health officials stateside. Most cases were reported in prisons and military bases where the close quarters would allow any communicable disease to spread quickly and which were closely monitored for health and sanitation. As such, health officials couldn't know how the civilian population was affected and ultimately erred in their assumption, and the disease could only spread in close quarters. The illness spread quickly, however, and health officials in Philadelphia issued a public warning in July. The disease abated slightly until late August, when more than 60 sailors in Boston became ill. By September, Camp Devens near Boston was so overwhelmed with cases that the city morgue stacked bodies like logs on the floor. The Massachusetts Department of Health issued a warning to the general public about the epidemic on September 5, 1918. On the West Coast, the public was misled into believing the epidemic would not pose a threat. However, on September 24th, a San Francisco man who had recently moved from Chicago contracted the disease. In Philadelphia, on September 28th, after a parade for a Fourth Liberty loan drive brought together approximately 200,000 people, the city reported 635 new cases of influenza. By the end of the month, the city declared an epidemic and closed all churches, schools, and places of public amusement. As the epidemic became widespread, Surgeon General Rupert Blue issued statements and pamphlets on how to recognize and treat influenza. Because much of the medical profession was either in the military or dedicated to treating returning injured soldiers, Blue called 250 doctors out of retirement to help combat the disease. The American Red Cross helped by organizing medical personnel and supplies with the National Committee on Influenza. Americans were warned against wearing tight clothes, instructed to chew food thoroughly, and told to gargle with a variety of chemicals like chlorinated soda water. The Committee of the American Public Health Association made various recommendations: laws against coughing and sneezing in public, outlawing the use of common dishes, washing hands before each meal, improving general personal hygiene, imbibing fresh air, and avoiding excessive physical exertion. Even so, people in Midwest rural communities did not have access to information and instead used folk remedies like eating and bathing in onions or wearing garlic. That October, the death rate in the United States was quadruple the historical average, and Philadelphia reported 650 deaths during one day. which prompted many urban residents to wear surgical masks in public. The speed at which the disease spread caused many in Boston to assert that a German U boat had planted the disease in Boston Harbor, a belief some military officials supported. World War I ended on November 11, 1918. Returning troops brought home a resurgence of influenza, and the many public victory celebrations helped the disease spread once more. Even President Woodrow Wilson suffered from flu symptoms during the early 1919 while negotiating the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Ultimately, the death rate from influenza shortened the average lifespan in the United States by 10 years before the illness mysteriously disappeared. Questions. Number 1, main idea. Mark the main idea of the reading. A. The origins of the flu epidemic are not known. B. Doctors were prepared for the epidemic. C. The influenza epidemic of 1918 resulted in major loss of life. D. The Germans were responsible for the flu epidemic of 1918. Number 2, subject matter. Another good title for this passage would be A. Flu kills more than war. B. Wilson suffers from flu symptoms. C. Gargle soda water to avoid the flu. D. Avoid public places. Number 3, supporting details. Which of the following was not one of the recommended ways to avoid spreading the flu? A. Avoid tight clothing. B. Avoid physical exertion. C. Do not cough or sneeze in public. D. Travel to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Conclusion. The writer of this passage wants the reader to reach the conclusion that A. The Red Cross could have stopped the spread of the flu. B. The flu resulted in a massive loss of life. C. Masks can help prevent the flu. D. Doctors were experts at curing the symptoms of the flu. 5. Clarifying devices. After World War I, what helped spread the influenza? A. Victory celebrations. B. A faulty vaccine. C. German U-boats. D. None of the above. 6. Vocabulary in context. The word communicable means A. Deadly. B. Minor. C. Contagious. D. Rare. Please hit submit when you are finished.